Number 6. The crew of the Sarah Joe. The Sarah Joe was a 17-foot motorboat that at the time 20-something-year-old Robert Mulakany acquired in the 1970s. He named it after his mom Sarah and dad Joe. The boat took 5 strong, healthy young men out to sea 40 years ago, and it wasn't until more than a decade later that their boat was found on the shores of one of the smallest of the Marshall Islands. But the men were not with the boat. Oddly enough, there was a shallow grave that contained the bones of one of the fishermen, but no other clues or signs of life. To make their disappearance stranger, oceanographers estimated that it would have only taken the boat about 3 months to drift onto the island, which means the boat, grave, or remaining crew should have been there when a government survey of the island took place in 1983, but they weren't. So we may never actually know what happened to the Sarah Joe and her crew for the 4 years between the disappearance and the survey of the island. Number 5. The missing lighthouse keepers. There was once an isolated island off the coast of Scotland where 3 lighthouse keepers lived and were responsible for keeping the building intact. One day when their monthly supply ship dropped in, the island was silent, no response from the lighthouse keepers. Eventually the captain and some crew members went to investigate and found the suspiciously empty lighthouse. 2 of the 3 waterproof coats were missing from their hangars, and the kitchen was left in a state as if people left in a hurry. The lighthouse log only added one mystery to the situation. The log described how one of the keepers wouldn't talk, and the other continuously cried for hours. All of this pain and fear seemed to be coming from what was referred to as a powerful storm looming in the distance. However, this begs the question, why were they so scared of a simple storm? They should have been safe in the brand new lighthouse, right? The log goes on to talk about how they all sat close together and prayed for the storm to be over. The final log states the storm has passed, the skies are calm, and God is over all. Their bodies were never found, and the cause of their deaths are still a mystery to this day. The most accepted theory is that they somehow got swept out to sea during the storm, never to be seen again. But one final detail remains, one that scared the captain and his crew to the bone. The powerful storm described in the log didn't exist. There were no storms reported in the area. In fact, the skies were calm all day. Number 4. The death of Chris Kremers and Lysand Froon. Both girls went on a study abroad trip to Panama, where they went missing on a hike. After several weeks, some of their remains were found miles up the river from where they began their hike, along with a backpack that contained their belongings. The creepy part of it is that a camera in their backpack started out with pictures that they took of each other hiking, and then suddenly goes into over 100 pictures of what appeared to be nighttime pictures of rocks near a riverbed, the back of someone's head, and just pure blackness. The dark pictures appeared to be taken many days after they went missing. There's a lot of theories as to why they went missing, what finally ended their lives, and why they were taking pictures, but there's no solid answer. According to their cell phone use records, they had been alive in the forest for days after they got lost, trying to get a signal from their phones to call emergency help. Number 3. The death of Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick Johnson was found rolled up in wrestling mats in Lowndes High School, and his death was ruled an accident. The official story is that he was reaching into the rolled up wrestling mats to get his shoe and got stuck and died. An initial autopsy concluded that the death was accidental, and Johnson's family wasn't happy with that, so they had an independent autopsy performed. This second autopsy showed that he died from blunt force trauma, and there's actually blood in many of the crime scene photos. People believe the conspiracy between the school and police is keeping a lot of information from the family. Video footage from the gym during the time of his death is missing, which makes this mystery all the more unsettling. Number 2. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. Amy was an American citizen who went missing during a Caribbean cruise on the Royal Caribbean Rhapsody of the Seas. On the morning of March 24, 1998, Amy had been drinking in the dance club with the ship's band Blue Orchid. One of the band's members, Alistair Douglas, known as Yellow, said he parted with Amy at about 1 a.m. Sometime between 5:15 and 5:30, Amy's father Ron saw her asleep on the deck. When he got up at 6 a.m., she was no longer there. There were possible sightings of Amy in Curacao in 1998 and 1999. 2 Canadian tourists reported seeing a woman resembling Amy on the beach in 1998. The woman's tattoos were allegedly identical to Amy's. A member of the Navy said he saw Amy in a brothel in 1999, and he claimed she told him that her name was Amy Bradley and that she begged him for help. There was another potential sighting in 2005. when the witness claimed she was seen in a department store restroom in Barbados. Amy's mother and father appeared on an episode of Dr. Phil. An image of a young woman resembling Amy that was emailed to her parents was shown on the show, and it suggests that she may have been sold into sex slavery. And number 1, the disappearance of Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach was a well-experienced hiker in Nevada who found a cave he described as the M Cave, as it was opened in the shape of an M. He claimed he heard very unusual noises from the cave and found it suspicious, as it was located 6 miles south of a top-secret airbase. As he began to enter the cave, he claimed his whole body began to vibrate. The more he went into the cave, the worse the vibrating became. He said he suddenly became very afraid and hightailed it out of there. He recorded another trip to find the cave again and catch it on video, but this video ended up being a bust. He later went back to where he found the cave again and has not been seen since. His phone was found in an abandoned mine entrance, but no body or evidence that he had gone down into the mine. He posted this video about the cave a few days before he went missing.
And I'm looking for a cave that I found, and I didn't have a sidearm when I was here before, and something about that cave just spooked me. Out of all the caves I've ever gone in, this one just made my body vibrate. The closer I got to it, the crazier my body felt, and I was like, all right, I'm not gonna go in there right now, but I'm coming back someday. And I talked to some people on YouTube, and I told them, hey, I'm coming out here, you know, because they kind of called my hand on it. So I don't know if there's going to be anything to it, but it might be interesting. If I can find it, I got to relocate it, and this is a big mountain range I'm in, and I'm on foot, you know. My truck's way out there. There's no roads, there's no trails. It's a pretty rough terrain. So hopefully I'll find it. It's shaped like a big M. It's a big cave that looks just like a gigantic M.
Kevin Wynn, who was 25 at the time, went missing in the early hours of December 9th, 2018. His family said he was kicked out of a bar called the Brass Rail on Broadway after an altercation, and that's the last they've seen or heard from him. Family, friends, and strangers have been hoping to find him or hear from him ever since. The following Sunday, nearly 150 volunteers and family members gathered at Lakeside Park to continue the search. The family searched the banks of the St. Joseph and St. Mary's rivers, and also the area around the Brass Rail. The following Thursday, they found his glasses broken in the parking lot of the bar. Kevin's family stated that his vision was very bad, and the fact that his glasses were broken and left behind was a very bad sign, and there's no way he'd be able to make his way around without seeing. Management at the bar told the family that Kevin had entered the bar 4 times the night he went missing. There's an Arby's down the road from the bar that had given the family 2 videos. They show Kevin walking by the restaurant alone, one around 1:40 in the morning, the other around 2:45 in the morning. The Brass Rail has given their surveillance video to detectives, but after 2 long years with no word, the family has become less hopeful. Many people believe he had broken his glasses and without his vision simply stumbled into the river and drowned. But if this were the case, the body would have been found during the multiple searches of the river, or at the very least, the body would have been washed up somewhere by now. In 2002, Michaela Lawrence, who was 12 at the time, and her entire family received news that her father had been in a fatal car accident. His body was barely recognizable from the wreck. The family, of course, opted for a closed casket funeral. A few weeks after the funeral, things started appearing in the mailbox of the Lawrence household, small packages with Michaela's name written on them. The packages would come once every few weeks. The first package was a small knick-knack type item. It was a decorative model glow-up Big Ben clock statue. It was a familiar piece that Michaela's mother recognized from the house somewhere. A few weeks later, another package came. This package contained an old antique stopwatch from the 50s. It didn't work anymore, but once again it looked familiar to Michaela's mother. None of the packages said who they were from or where they came from. A few more weeks later, on Michaela's 13th birthday, a card in an envelope ended up in the mailbox, and written on it was Michaela's name again. The card was a happy birthday card, but once again the mother recognized this card and the handwriting was familiar. It was the handwriting of her thought-to-be-deceased husband. but it was a card that the couple had given to their daughter years ago, and it was signed Love Mom and Dad. This confirmed her suspicions that the items that had been arriving in the mail were possessions from the house, those of her husband's. She tried to check the safe in the bedroom closet to see if anything was missing, but mysteriously the safe combination no longer seemed to work no matter how many times she tried. She tried going to the police about the packages at her house, but police couldn't do anything except advise to install some kind of security system. To this day, it's not known who sent the packages or how whoever sent them got a hold of them. Frauke Liebs disappeared on June 20th, 2006 from the town Paderborn in Germany. Her body was found almost 4 months later, on October 4th, 2006. The circumstances of her disappearance are mysterious, especially since she's believed to have made contact with her friends between her disappearance and her death. 2006 was the year of the Football World Cup in Germany. Frauke met with some friends at the Old Triangle Irish pub in downtown Paderborn to watch some of the games. Her mom dropped her off at the pub around 9 p.m. During the Sweden-England match, she exchanged text messages with an acquaintance until the battery of her cell phone ran out. She then borrowed the battery of her friend, but the friend said that she returned the battery before leaving. At about 11 p.m., Frauke left the bar. It's assumed that she walked home because she was said to only have about €5 on her at that point. Her flat was about 1 mile away from the pub. Nobody knows which path she took because nobody saw her after she left the pub. Her flatmate Chris claimed that she never arrived in the flat. At 12:49 a.m., her roommate received a text from Frauke, which stated that she'd be back late. She did not appear at work the following day, and after she was not in the apartment, Frauke's mother reported her missing. Over the next few days, Frauke contacted her roommate 5 times over cell phone. The calls were usually short and during the evening hours, and did not contain a lot of information about her situation. In the first calls, she hinted that she would come back soon, but answered further questions evasively or mysteriously. The last phone call was received on the evening of June 27th, while Frauke's sister was present. Frauke got asked by her sister if she was held against her will, and she supposedly said yes, but then immediately corrected herself by saying no in a louder tone. After that, the contact of Frauke was lost. According to police, during these phone calls, Frauke's cell phone was in various industrial zones of Paderborn. The police also assumed that the calls were placed from within a car that was driven to those areas. The case was never solved. Jack Wheeler held many important positions throughout his lifetime. He was a chairman for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, a senior planner for Amtrak, an official of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and more. His value to his community made it much worse when Jack disappeared on December 28, 2010, after exiting an Amtrak near Wilmington, Delaware. He was later seen on December 30th at 10th and Orange Street in Wilmington. On December 31st, his body was discovered by a landfill worker as it fell onto a trash heap in the Cherry Island landfill. His death was later ruled a homicide. His death was ruled to be due to assault and blunt force trauma. It was determined that all of the stops the garbage truck had made that day involved large commercial disposal bins in Newark, a few miles from Jack's home. Prior to Jack's death, he was cited several times. On December 29th, he was sighted at the Newcastle County Courthouse parking garage. He was disoriented and wearing only one shoe. He tried to gain access to the garage on foot, claiming that he wanted to warm up before paying the parking fee. He told the attendant that his briefcase had been stolen, and he kept claiming that he wasn't intoxicated, but the attendant didn't believe him. It was later determined that his car was in a different garage. This was the last CCTV footage taken of him. Later that day, Jack asked a pharmacist in Newcastle for a ride to Wilmington. He reportedly looked upset at the time. The pharmacist offered to call him a cab. He then left the store. On December 30th, he was seen wandering around various office buildings. Several people asked if he needed help, but he refused any assistance. This case has still never been solved. Lastly, we have the disappearance of Brian Schaefer. In 2006, Ohio State student Brian Schaefer went into a bar and never came out. He was out with 2 friends one night and they went to a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. This bar had a front main entrance and a back entrance for staff and entertainment, both of which had cameras pointed at them. Around 10 p.m. that night, Brian called his girlfriend to tell her that he loved her. Soon after, Brian is seen on camera entering the bar, and then later seen stepping out of the bar to talk to 2 girls before going back inside. Minutes before the bar closed and they were preparing to leave, Brian told his friends he was going to talk to the band. Brian walked away out of sight and his friends waited for him, but he was never seen again. This was not a large bar, and the band does not remember talking to him. On top of it, the cameras never caught him exiting the bar. No one knows what happened to Brian after he walked away from his friends, or how he left the bar, or if he ever did for that matter. An FBI agent who was specialized in facial recognition spent a long time analyzing the security footage of the bar and watched every person who came in and out of the venue. He never identified Brian leaving, but years later, after he had stopped working on the case, he was at an Ohio State football game and saw someone across the crowd that he couldn't help but think looked very much like Brian. In fact, he bore such a resemblance to Brian that the agent had to go and talk to him. It turned out it was Brian's brother, proving just how good the agent's facial recognition abilities were. Brian's girlfriend called his cell phone every day for weeks, and it always went straight to voicemail until one night when it actually rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. This was unexplainable. The truly weirdest part about this whole thing is that the last footage of Brian was him re-entering the bar. No footage was ever found of him leaving the bar, which has led to theories that he never did leave. To this day, no one knows where he is.
A man and woman went to Las Vegas for their honeymoon and checked into a suite at a hotel. When they got to their room, they both detected a bad odor. The husband called down to the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. He explained that the room smelled very bad and they would like another suite. The manager apologized and told the man that they were all booked because of a convention. He offered to send them to a restaurant of their choice for lunch, compliments of the hotel, and said he was going to send a maid up to their room to clean and to try and get rid of the odor. After a nice lunch, the couple went back to their room. When they walked in, they could both still smell the horrible odor. Again, the husband called the front desk and told the manager that the room still smelled really bad. The manager told the man that they would try and find a suite at another hotel. He called every hotel on the strip, but every hotel was sold out because of the convention. The manager told the couple that they couldn't find them a room anywhere, but they would try and clean the room again. The couple wanted to see the sights and do a little gambling anyway, so they said they would give them 2 hours to clean and then they would be back. When the couple had left, the manager and all of the housekeeping staff went to the room to try and find what was making it smell so bad. They went through the entire suite and found nothing. So the maids put in new sheets, new towels, took down the curtains and put new ones up, cleaned the carpet, and cleaned the suite again using the strongest cleaning products they had. The couple came back 2 hours later to find the room still had a bad odor. The husband was so angry at this point, he decided to find whatever the smell was himself, so he started tearing the entire suite apart. As he pulled the top mattress off the box spring of the bed, he found a dead body of a woman. Me and my wife were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were on the island of Oahu, sitting on the beach. My wife got up to go to the bathroom, and when she got back, she told me that there was a creepy man watching her walk into the bathroom, and when she tried to walk out, he blocked her path. She only got away because there were 2 other people walking into the bathroom, so he got out of the way. I asked her what the man looked like, and she looked over, but unfortunately, she said he was gone. Our hotel was walking distance from the beach, so we got back quickly, but we made sure to report the man to a police officer we saw walking on the beach, and then we washed up before going out to eat. We ate at a fancy seafood place and did some walking around afterwards. Close to midnight, we finally went back to the room and began to wind down. Then we got a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole of the door and saw a man in a maid uniform standing outside. I opened the door and he immediately tried to let himself in. I pushed him back a bit, asking him what he wanted. He told me he left something in the room while cleaning earlier and needed to get it out. The only thing, we left the do not disturb sign on the door all day. Then I noticed he was making eye contact with my wife. My wife then screamed, "That's the man." I didn't understand at first, but it was too late for that. The man had already lunged at me, holding my throat with one hand while reaching behind himself with another. He pulled out a knife and started swinging at me, and if it weren't for my wife coming over and smashing his face with the lamp, I would have been as good as dead. The commotion drew out all the inhabitants of the neighboring rooms. One of the women started freaking out and screaming, making the situation worse. We called the police, and so did the hotel. It turned into a huge, horrible scene, but we were just happy to be alive. We were questioned when the police arrived, and some of the other people around us claimed to have witnessed it all. We still don't know what kind of intentions this guy had, but if I had to guess, I would say he wanted to get to my wife. He must have been one very dumb person to think he would get away with something like this in such a public building. Me, my wife, and 2 kids were taking a drive all the way down to Florida from New York to go to Disney. We were in Georgia at the time, so close to entering Florida, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. I planned on finishing the drive that night just to save the money from a night at a hotel. My wife and kids were already long asleep, so I was trying to drive as smoothly as possible. On that quiet highway at 11 o'clock, there were hardly any other cars at all. In fact, I didn't see any lights until, up in the horizon, I saw 2 flashing red lights. Not police lights, more like SOS lights. I slowed down and proceeded with caution. Upon getting closer, I saw a car parked in the middle of the road, seemingly deliberately to block traffic, along with 2 cones placed on either side and 2 SOS lights flashing on the ground. Then, 2 hooded men of African American descent came from behind the car and started walking over to us. I put the car in reverse, ready to hightail it back the other way. One of the men came over to my window, and I cracked it open just enough to hear him speak. After asking him if he needed something, he said, "Yes, open the door." I shut the window, and that's when he began to reach for something in his pocket. I put the car back in drive and hit the gas. I drove over the cone and SOS light and past their car. About 1 minute later, I saw a pair of headlights coming up fast behind us. At this point, my wife was awake, confused and questioning me about the speed we were moving at. I told her not to make any loud noises before telling her that we were being followed. The car behind us began flashing its lights. And then there was a loud pop, and I felt the car losing control. I did the best I could to bring it under control, but there was a second loud pop, and the car began to drag. I told my wife to call 911, even though it was probably already too late. By now my kids were up, scared and complaining. I kept the car moving for as long as possible, but the car following us began ramming our trunk. My kids were crying, my wife was screaming at the police. I was sure we were dead. But by some stroke of luck, or more like a miracle, I heard a siren and saw red and blue flashing lights coming up in the distance behind our chasers. They veered off to the exit that we happened to be passing at that moment, and the police car followed them. I pulled over to the side of the road, took the phone away from my wife, and told the police everything. Upon inspection, I found out that our 2 back tires were blown, probably shot at, which I also told the police. 10 minutes later, a squad pulled up behind us, along with a AAA truck. They seemed rather thrilled to inform us that they caught the 2 men. Someone else had stumbled onto their little roadblock trap, but luckily managed to turn around and escape before calling the cops. When my sister was in her 20s, she was on vacation with her now husband, and one of their destinations was St. Martin. They had rented a car to get around and such. One day while doing sightseeing, they were on some side road that was rather isolated from any buildings or signs of civilization. It was a nice scenic route to take, but other than that, my sister tells me that it was a pretty dead road, so it probably didn't lead anywhere important. They eventually came up to something odd. There was the back of a car sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. As they pulled up closer, they could see it was some unbranded rusty neon blue car that had seemingly swerved into the crops. My sister's husband pulled up and stopped the car, telling my sister to wait in the car. He got out to check it out. From what my sister tells me, her husband looked through all the windows of the car for anybody at all. She watched as he then looked down and jumped back at something. She then got out of the car to see what was wrong. They both got down low to have a look underneath the rusty old car. What they saw was horrifying. There were two grown men with large knives in their hands, along with a bloody dead body laying between them. My sister's husband literally pushed her all the way back to the car and shoved her into her seat. The two men had crawled out from under the car and were now on their feet. He made it back into the car just in time to drive off down the road. They stopped at the nearest sign of civilization, making sure they weren't being followed, and called the police. Both of them seem to get uneasy when the topic is brought up, so we try not to remind them of it, but I can tell my sister has always been a bit different ever since this happened to her. I was 16 years old and the summer had just started. Our grandparents were treating the whole family to a 10-day cruise. It was a Royal Caribbean cruise, and we were going to Florida and the Bahamas. It was me, my two brothers, my sister and her boyfriend, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my two cousins, and my grandparents. I spent most of my time hanging out with my older brother, Rob, who was 20. We got to share a room together, even though it really wasn't allowed. We just claimed that our dad was staying with us in that room. So one night, me and my brother were in the nightclub of the ship. I snuck in using someone else's ship ID card. When I was in there, I noticed some older, creepy-looking man sitting by the wall, and I was sure he was staring intently at me. I made a point of moving around to see if he was really looking at me, and his head turned to face me wherever I went. I was feeling really uncomfortable, so I left right then and there. I coincidentally found my sister and her boyfriend sitting by the bar outside of the club. I sat down with them for a bit, and a few moments later, I saw the same man from in the club, now out by the bar, sitting across the room, and he was still staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to notice, but my heart was racing at this point. I contemplated whether or not to tell my sister, but I ended up not telling her. I don't know why. I left the bar and started speed walking back to my room. When I got to the stateroom halls, I was constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed. I got to my room safely. I was extremely creeped out. I had a feeling this guy was some sort of perverted creep. I got a knock at the door, and I got a little nervous. I looked through the peephole and saw my brother, so I let him in. I did not see the strange man again until late the next night. My brother and I went with my sister and her boyfriend to one of the restaurants on board at like 1 in the morning. They weren't planning on going to sleep anytime soon, so I told them I was going to crash, and I walked back to the stateroom. But when I got there, I saw that the door to our room was cracked open a bit, and the light was on. I knew for sure we shut the door when we left, and there was no chance room service was in there at an hour like this. I proceeded with extreme caution and slowly pushed the door open completely. There was nobody in the room. I checked the bathroom, but it was empty too. All of our stuff was still in the same spot that I remembered it was in. I kind of just figured maybe Rob came back to the room for some reason when I wasn't with him and forgot to shut the door, so I just went to sleep. I woke up to darkness and the feeling of something brushing against my cheek. It was a hand. I pushed it away, telling Rob to knock it off, but when I noticed, even in the dark, beyond the figure by my bed, that Rob was in his bed, I let out the most blood-curdling scream you have ever heard. Rob jumped up and turned the lamp on, and there was the man from the club standing next to me. Rob jumped on him and began throwing punches. I joined in and we took down the man. It wasn't even a minute before frantic knocking came at the door. It was my parents. My dad held down the man while we called the customer service center. They sent up 2 security workers and he was sent to the jail of the ship for the remainder of the cruise. I'm not sure what happened to him afterwards, but this has emotionally scarred me, and I don't think I can ever go on another cruise again.
Has anyone ever had sleep paralysis before? I tell you, it's one of the strangest, most fascinating, yet horrifying things that you could experience. It's the feeling of being unable to move upon awakening. Your senses and awareness are intact, but you still feel as though you're in this half-asleep, half-awake state. I'd heard stories of this long before it happened to me. I've only experienced it once. I was in college. I was going through an incredibly tough time in my life, and I was insanely stressed during finals week. I wasn't getting much sleep. It must have been the night before my last final. I went to bed late because I stayed up all night studying for bio. I don't remember at what point I decided to finally call it. I just remember it all becoming a blur, then blackness. Next thing I remember, I was in my room, in my bed, but there was this weird haziness in my awareness. Like I was awake, but I felt weaker. And when I tried to move, I couldn't. I could only move my eyes to look around the dark room. At one point, when I guess I was looking to one side of the room, I looked back to the center, and there was this woman standing dead center in the room, facing the bed. She was wearing this black dress and holding some long object. I wanted to call out, "Mom?" but my paralysis prevented it. I couldn't say anything. The woman came closer to me until she knelt down and touched my forehead, and I could feel it. She got eye to eye with me, and I could see my mother's face. I tried to say "Mom" again, desperately, but I was stuck in my own body. She stood back up and walked to the doorway before disappearing into the house. I lay there unable to move maybe another 10 to 20 seconds before my vision suddenly became more clear, and I was able to think more clearly as well. I was able to sit up. I jumped out of the bed screaming "Mom" over and over. I ran to the bedroom hallway yelling her name. A door opened down the hall and someone came to hug me, but it wasn't my mom. It was my dad, telling me he misses her too. My mom died 3 weeks before this happened. You know what I love about dreams? How vague and how bizarre they can be. You feel like you're in this separate world where things can just make no sense. Now what about when that unearthliness transcends into the quote-unquote real world? You'll see what I mean in a minute. I was in REM sleep having this bizarre nightmare about being followed by some weird creature in the middle of the woods. The dream became fuzzy though, and I kind of woke up from it. I say kind of because while I was out of the dream and back in my bed, I couldn't move a muscle in my body. I started hearing this faint, weird noise. It was this indescribable, robotic, yet alive type sound. It started light and soft, but it repeated every 3 seconds. I noticed it was getting slightly louder every time. I felt like the sound was getting closer. It got so unbearably loud in my head, I just wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Then my eyes locked onto the closet door, specifically the crack in the closet door, which I never leave open ever. There was this distorted face of a man looking between the crack, with this unhumanly large open-mouthed smile, and every time I heard the noise, it seemed as if the closet and the face were getting closer, until the closet door slammed shut, and everything went silent. I regained control of my body shortly after that, and the first thing I did, even though I was 24 years old, was run to my parents' room to get my dad to check the closet with me. There was nothing in the closet though, or the rest of my room. My dad seemed pretty confident that what I just experienced was sleep paralysis, and that he had experienced it once as well. Didn't make me feel any less disturbed about what I just went through. Many years ago, I had a sleep paralysis experience. I knew there was a thing in my closet, something really evil, but I also knew I was dreaming and I should face my fear. I tried not to look directly at the closet door, but if I moved my eyes, my head would turn away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't look directly at it. Then I woke up in a cold sweat. At first I felt really relieved that it was over, but very shortly I realized it wasn't a dream and there was really something in the closet. I was laying on my back and couldn't move, and I didn't really hear it, but I could kind of feel the sickening laughter wash over me in waves, emanating from the closet. All of a sudden, the thing throws a human head at me and it lands on my chest face up. It was this girl I knew in high school. Up to this point, I was kind of holding it together, terrified but not panicked. Well, I lose it now. I can't even scream. All I could do is make these grunting sounds and moaning noises. I'm wriggling and straining, trying to rock from side to side to get it off me, but I can't move. This seemed to last maybe another minute or two, and then I really woke up. It was so traumatic that for weeks I would be scared when I woke up that I wasn't actually awake and something horrible could happen at any second. It still makes my skin crawl when I think about that laugh. The thing is, I never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors at that point in my life. I thought I was losing my mind. I've suffered sleep paralysis a total of 3 times in my life. The first 2 times, it just consisted of me waking up not being able to move my body. The third time was much different though. I had woken up very early morning, probably like between 5 and 6 a.m., when the sun was just starting to come up. There was light in the room, but barely any. I tried to move, but I had that unfortunately familiar feeling of paralysis, helplessness. My eyes fixated on the wall. There was nothing I could do. Then, suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs of my bedroom. It was my brother, followed by my sister, dad, and mom. They were all sobbing hysterically, and they all seemed to be at least a foot taller. It was unnerving. The 4 of them approached my bed, then stopped at the bedside, towering over me, all 4 of them crying. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry for help or just yell at them to stop because they were scaring me. Their heights, they looked like they were near to hitting the ceiling. Then, just as quickly as they entered, all 4 of them turned and walked back down the stairs. I could move again, and so I ran down the stairs to follow them, but they weren't in the outside area. I went to each of their rooms one at a time. All 4 of them were fast asleep. My heart was racing because the most surreal, unnerving thing just happened to me. I had to lean on the wall to gather my thoughts for a second, breathing heavily. Falling back asleep was futile the rest of the night. I lay awake until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I was struck by a speeding car when crossing the road with friends and ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh bone. I was hospitalized for a week, and at one point, all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed, looking down at me, my mom being emotional and crying. It was almost the same image from my sleep paralysis. I'm not superstitious at all, but if I were, I would 100% believe that dream was some kind of sign, or some kind of prediction of the future. In fact, I just got chills writing that last sentence, thinking about it. There was this one time I was out late drinking with friends. It was some point in the summer of 2016. We were kind of just walking around town and then around the neighborhood when one of my friends spotted someone hiding in a bush. He pointed and said, "Look," and we all walked a little closer to get a better look. We could see what he was talking about, but just barely. It was bizarre, like someone hiding in this bush in front of this house. When we got too close, apparently, this weird, off-putting sound started coming from the bush. So we all screamed and laughed and ran away. We screamed because it was scary, but laughed because at the same time it was bizarrely funny. And there were a lot of us, so... Anyway, we walked back to our houses respectively, assuming whoever was in that bush was just messing with people. I fell asleep pretty easily that night since I was drunk, but next thing I remember was waking up to the near pitch blackness of my room. I couldn't look at the clock to see what time it was because I literally couldn't move. I was in a sleep paralysis state. I looked around the room with my eyes only and started to hear a familiar noise, the noise we heard coming from that bush. Then I looked straight in front of me, at the foot of my bed, and what I saw was pure nightmare fuel. It was what appeared to be this floating, grotesque, horrific head of a demonic ghost-like thing. As it got closer to me, I realized it wasn't floating. There was a body, but its body blended in with the blackness of the room. Its mouth hung open, and it just kept making the familiar noise from the bush. It got mere inches from my face before it suddenly just faded away, and I was able to let out a scream and move my body. I sat in my bed, panting and heart racing. I flicked on the lamp and checked around my bed, but that demonic thing was gone. What I just experienced seemed so real, like I was awake for it. It wasn't a dream. I told my parents about it the next day, and they agreed with me that it was sleep paralysis, though they had never heard of anyone seeing freaky shit like that before.
I spent a solid weekend playing on the computer a few years ago, drinking a lot of ephedra and coffee and generally not sleeping much. Every so often I'd feel an itch on my arms, like a loose hair falling on them. I'd brush it off and go back to staring at the computer. As this itching was happening more frequently, I started wondering if I was just imagining things or delusional from the tea and insomnia, but then I noticed what appeared to be tiny spiders on my arms. Am I going crazy? Are these drug bugs or what? And I went back to the screen. Then I saw the strings of thin webs glistening in the light and tiny spiders floating past my vision. They were real indeed. I noticed a hole in the ceiling where they appeared to be falling from. I blasted a can of wasp spray into the hole and hundreds of these little spiders began pouring out, streaming from their webs. Hundreds of them, all over me. I got home from work late one night, was walking onto my front stoop, when I walked right into this huge spider web. At first I didn't think much of it until I looked down, and saw about 20 to 30 baby spiders all over me. I started freaking out, then noticed the parents sitting on my door. They were huge, almost the size of a hand. So of course I didn't want to use the front door. I run to my back door, throw off all my clothes and jump in the shower. I then watch as the spiders began falling out of my hair. I got home late and my phone was about to die. I always plugged my phone into the outlet under my bed. I collapsed on my bed and reached my hand under my bed to try and find my phone's charger. But what I found instead was some kind of squishy sack. I began poking and squeezing it, when all of a sudden, I felt hundreds of little legs poking me and crawling up my arm. I pulled my arm up from under my bed and then screamed when I saw probably 30 baby spiders crawling up my arm. I shook them off, told my parents, and jumped in the shower right away. Turned out it was a baby spider sack, and there was an even bigger mother spider living under my bed. I awoke from my deep sleep in the middle of the night to the feeling of something huge crawling around in my bed. Still half asleep, I jumped out and started freaking out, assuming it was a spider or something. With one swift motion of bravery, I flung the covers off the bed, but nothing was there. I started to think that I was just feeling it as part of a dream, and I continued to feel it until I fully woke up, so I went back to sleep. The next night, I felt the same exact thing. I felt it on my arms this time instead of my legs. Again, I jumped out of bed, still not in the fully awake state of mind. I was again freaking out and ran to my parents' room to get my dad. He was never afraid of spiders. He came to my room and flung off the sheets and covers. There was nothing there. I was convinced at this point that it had something to do with my dreams, or something was wrong with me, because there was no spider in my bed whatsoever. However, the next night, it happened again. The feeling of something huge crawling on my arm. Freaking out again, in my half-awake, confused state of mind, I once again jumped out of bed and flung off the covers, but this time I was greeted by the sight of the biggest spider I'd ever seen. Bigger than a tarantula. It quickly crawled under my bed and out of sight as I screamed and went off to my parents' room again to tell my dad. This happened when I was staying with my grandma for the weekend. My uncle still lived with her, and occasionally I would stay over to work with my uncle for some good pay. Anyway, I was exhausted after a long day's work with my uncle, so I basically fell into the rickety old guest bed upstairs. I watched some TV for about 10 minutes before just deciding to go to sleep. It was a hot night. You know how on hot nights you constantly have to flip over the pillow to the cooler side? Well, when I did that, I put my head back down on the pillow. I didn't feel the soft, cushiony pillow on my cheek. I felt a furry, indescribable object press up on my face. I jumped up in response to it and saw a giant, full-grown huntsman spider sitting on my pillow. I fell to the opposite side of the bed, and I guess the shaking scared the thing because it took off at the speed of light. Where it went, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure the thing is still in my grandma's house.
I was looking for a car to buy for my son for his 18th birthday. I was searching all the typical car websites, cars.com, eBay Motors. They were all overpriced as expected. Craigslist was the only place to find an actual deal. About a week into my search, I found an 03 Toyota Camry. It had 67,000 miles, no accidents, no damage, and good condition for only $3,500. This seemed like a steal for such a reliable car with such low mileage. The seller lived about 10 miles from me, which was a reasonable drive when looking for a car. I gave him a call to set up a time to come check it out. The man sounded normal on the phone. He assured me there were absolutely no problems with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I brought along $3,500 in cash, even though I planned on wiggling down the price as much as possible. I pulled up the dirt road to Bob's property about 15 minutes early. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, only because it was a bit far from the nearest neighbors. The garage was open, so I looked over to see if anyone was inside, but except for an unusual amount of car parts, it was empty. The car was nowhere in sight. The only car on the property was an old pickup truck. I went over to the front door to check the house numbers. It was the right address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the front door. I knocked every once in a while for exactly 5 minutes before deciding to give the man a call. So I dialed his number, and I heard the sound of his phone ringing from inside the house. I was extremely confused at this point. Now I knew I had the right house. I didn't understand why, if he was home, why he wasn't answering. I decided I had to take a peek through one of the windows to see if anyone was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't really see much as it was pretty dark inside the house. I saw a very old-fashioned dining room set, but across from that, I saw somebody standing at the back door of the house, staring outside. I figured that must have been Bob, so I knocked on the window, but he didn't even move. There was no gate or anything to the backyard. It was just a wide open yard since this wasn't a rural area. I simply walked around the house to the backyard. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me. When I got to the back door, I made a shocking realization. The figure standing by the door was a taxidermied human being. I ran straight back the way I came and back to my car. I looked up one last time before driving off. The blinds to the window I had peeked into had been shut, but I could see 2 of the blinds creased open. Somebody was at that window, watching me. You could probably guess I had the gas pedal to the floor the whole way home. The whole situation still makes no sense. All the car parts, the fact that there was no Toyota Camry, the taxidermied human being. Given that there was no car there, leads me to believe that whoever that man was wasn't planning on selling me anything. And that also leads me to the disturbing thought that I was very close to becoming a lifeless statue staring out that man's back door. This happened when I was really little and often left alone with my single mom. She always came to check on me every night when she would get up to go to the bathroom. This one night in particular, I remember waking up thinking I heard something in my closet. I looked up and my mom was at the foot of my bed giving me a playful wave. She told me to go back to sleep, She then went into my closet and pulled the door until it was just barely open, and she just stood in there, poking her head through the crack of the barely open closet. I remember vividly seeing her eye peeking through the crack at me. I laughed like any little kid would do in that situation, and then fell asleep moments later. When I was eating cereal the next morning, I asked my mom why she was hiding in my closet last night, and she just stopped and gave me a puzzled and concerned look. She told me she hadn't been in the room all night. At first she assumed somebody had broken into the house, but she soon realized it was some kind of hallucination or dream. Since this experience, I've only had 2 other hallucinations, neither of them as vivid or as creepy as this one.
In the year 2009, I was spending a weekend with my uncle on his ranch when my parents were renovating the new house we had just bought. It was my second night there, a Saturday, and it happened to be during one of the biggest thunderstorms of the year. I'd say there were at least 3 crashes of thunder and lightning per minute. And we were in the heart of the storm because the thunder would crash not even a second after the lightning would. I always enjoyed listening to storms while laying in bed. So I stayed up a little later watching TV, just enjoying the ambiance. After the movie I was watching finally ended, I turned off the TV and tried to fall asleep. As I heard the lightning strike from outside, I could have sworn I heard some kind of metallic thud coming from outside at the same time. I didn't pay it too much mind. 20 seconds later, I could have sworn I heard it again. A very distinct metallic thud coming from outside to match the timing of the lightning. I really don't mean to make this sound like a cliche horror story, but my uncle really is a kind of creepy guy, and I was never close with him even remotely, so for that reason I didn't feel right going to wake him up. I just tried to forget about it. Now I was getting concerned. What the hell could that be? After the 3rd time, I finally got out of bed and walked over to the window of the guest bedroom. The water pouring down on the window made it extra hard to see what was out there in the dark fields. A flash of lightning momentarily lit up the property, but I couldn't see anything. However, once again, the sound of a metal hit accompanied it. The sound was so close now, it sounded like it was coming from the left of the window at a blind spot. I was going to do something I knew my uncle wouldn't be happy about. It would be a bit messy, but I was going to open the window and peer outside to see if I could see what the sound was. I unhooked the window lock and slid it up, and immediately the wind of the storm blew drops of rain into the room and onto me. I stuck my head out the window and looked to the left, and at that very moment, lightning lit up the property once again, and I could see a person dressed in all black crouched down by the outside basement door with his hand raised in the air. And before the sky went dark, I caught the briefest glimpse of what the sound was coming from. The person was bashing at the basement door lock. I pulled my head in and quietly shut the window, making sure to lock it. I was in a panic. I feared he might have seen or heard me. I ran back to bed and pretended to be asleep, facing away from the window. Lightning crashed once again, but this time there was no metallic thud. My heart must have dropped as I realized this. I just stayed put in bed for the longest time, hoping whoever was out there would go away. After maybe 3 more lightning crashes without any thuds accompanying them, I thought it would be safe to go tell my uncle. I turned to face the window and screamed. There was a figure, clear as day, standing at the window, looking in at me. I screamed as loud as I could and ran straight to my uncle's room. He went outside with his hunting rifle with nothing on but his pajamas, not even socks. He ran around the entire property yelling like a madman, but didn't find anyone. The next morning, we were able to better see the marks on the basement door lock. It was almost bashed open. Maybe 3 or 4 more good hits would have done it, according to my uncle. He was proud of me for picking up on it. Luckily, I was out of there that same day. My uncle hasn't told us of any incidents since, so I think he's been okay. Not that we talked to him much at all. I'm grateful I stayed up a little later that night watching that movie, because I may have just stopped a robbery, or possibly much worse.
I don't care if anyone judges me, but I like to go to the movie theaters alone. My work schedule's all over the place. I often don't work weeknights. So on a stormy Wednesday night, a night not many other people would be thinking to go drive to a movie theater, I did just that. I always like avoiding crowds in anything I do. That's just how I am. It was 2017. I went to see some low-key movie that probably wasn't at the top of most people's must-see movie lists. I was the only one in the theater, just like I expected. I sat myself right in the center seat of one of the higher-up rows and put my feet up on the seat in front of me. About 20 minutes into the movie, I'd say, I noticed someone a few aisles down. I didn't notice them coming in. The theater was dark because the scene in the movie at the time was in a dark room. They weren't sitting in a seat like a normal person, though. All I saw of them was the top half of their head, peering over one of the seats to be looking in a direction that definitely was not the screen. It was still too dark to be able to tell if they were looking directly at me or not, but when the scene changed to a brighter background, the whole theater got brighter. Bright enough to see they were looking basically at me. But their face was so pale and lifeless looking, and their hair messy and wiry looking, I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. I'm an introvert, or just an awkward person, so I didn't really want to ask if there was something wrong. I viewed that as confrontation. The screen went darker again, and at the same time, the person lowered down behind the chair completely until I couldn't see them anymore. They were completely hidden from my view. I couldn't concentrate on the movie now, though. I was actually very uncomfortable. Actually quite terrified. I didn't get up, though. I stayed put in my seat. Many scenes in the movie passed. I almost forgot about what happened. Almost. Just when I was getting back into the movie, the person's head appeared from behind a seat again. This time much closer, only like 3 rows of seats away from me. I actually let out a holy shit and a loud yell because it genuinely made me jump. Now I was able to see more detail or features in their face. They actually looked lifeless. Their eyes, motionless, hung open. But still, I somehow couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me or not. Now I could better see it was a man with long, unkempt hair. I noped the F out of my seat and down the road to the exit. I had to pass the row in which the person was in to get to the exit door. As I passed the row, I looked down it, and while I expected to see the rest of the person's body sitting hunched behind the seats, instead what I saw was something you'd see in a nightmare. There was some guy basically laying on the floor, holding up a severed head perched on a stick. I didn't stick around to see if it was some sick joke or if the head was real or not. I ran for it through the exit door, and I ran out of the back exit of the building to the parking lot. I drove home in a panic, heart racing. That head looked so real. I got home and did some research about possible recent murders or missing people in the area, and I found something. After browsing a list of missing people in the area, I found the picture of a 17-year-old boy named Donald Watkins who had gone missing a month prior, and based on the picture I found, his face could have matched the head I saw in that theater. Of course, that could be my brain trying to connect any similarities, but the hair, the nose, the eyes, they looked like they could actually be a match. The next day, I simply made a call to the theater and told them the story and suggested they check their cameras and see if anything strange came up. I gave them my number to reach me if they needed to, but I never heard from them. I chose to not spend any more of my time on it. A long time ago, I very briefly lived with my good friend Ben on a quiet street in Northville, Michigan, perhaps notable for being close to Detroit. It wasn't the nicest house, or block, or area for that matter, but the price was unbeatable for 2 broke young men like ourselves. Ben and I went way back to when we were like 9 years old, and at the time of this story, we worked the same job, and rooming together with him seemed like a great idea. On our first day there, we quickly figured out that the creepy-looking house across the street with the overgrown grass and bushes was abandoned, as were a lot of the houses around the area. In fact, something we somehow hadn't noticed before, there was even graffiti next to one of the front windows and on the fence. Our neighbors on one side seemed like creeps, and we didn't even want to approach them. The neighbor on the other side was an older dude, a very interesting, hippie-ish kind of guy. His name was Marv. He had long gray hair with a matching long gray beard.
He seemed friendly at first, I guess, but also very weird and hard to talk to. We spoke with him on our second day there after work. He told us the place had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. That night, with the sun almost set, while we were sitting on the front stoop smoking, I looked to the house across the street and felt a little tingle in my stomach out of shock. I stood up, threw my cigarette onto the floor and crushed it. Ben looked at me confused, and I pointed to the window across the street. I was pointing at a face, which I saw staring at me through the lone upstairs window of the house. Do you see that? There's someone at that window. Ben looked at the window immediately, but I saw the person move their head away before he could see it. It's weird. I explained to Ben that I didn't even know if it was a male or female, old or young. The glass was just too foggy. All I knew was that I saw the eyes, and they were staring at us. Ben told me I was legitimately creeping him out. He believed me. We ran over to Marv's house to tell him, but strangely he didn't answer his door, even though we saw him watching TV in his tiny, messy living room through the window. The fact that the guy wouldn't answer creeped us out even more. Dude, what the fuck is going on with this place? Ben laughed, but the situation couldn't stay comical for long. Ben owns a katana. He brought it to mention and suggested we go across the street with it, break into the house from the backyard, and see what was going on. We were always adventurous, daring troublemakers as kids, so this was our natural response to the situation. When it got dark, we went across the street to the backyard, broke off the board holding the back door shut, and entered the house. We both had heavy-duty flashlights with us to light up basically any room we were in. The house was dusty, decrepit, but surprisingly seemed to remain untouched from the inside. No graffiti or signs of vandalism anywhere. Still, the place was disturbingly creepy, and we immediately joked that we should get the fuck out of there, but we pressed on. The first floor was pathetically small like our own, a kitchen, a tiny living room, and a dining room. There was no basement and one closet. The first floor was clear. We both agreed to check the upstairs. We tiptoed over to the stairs, and Ben, out of nowhere, screamed, "Is anybody up there?" "Dude, why the fuck would you do that?" I said quietly. Then we both froze in fear when we heard rapid stomping suddenly appear from above us. It was someone heavy, and it sounded like they were running over to the stairway. I literally felt like my heart stopped. Ben, the one with the katana, was the first to flee, grabbing my arm and tugging me with him. We went out the way we entered and ran back to the house, where we saw Marv just standing by his window, watching us. We didn't know what to do. He just intently stared at us as we froze to catch our breath in front of the house. We went inside, decided not to call the police, and moved out literally the next day. We explained to the landlord that the location was just too inconvenient for us, and we needed to leave ASAP. We drove away from that house and never looked back. For my son's 12th birthday, my wife and I threw him a little party in the backyard. We invited the whole family, as we usually did for any of our kids' birthdays, and let him invite all of his friends too. We live in rural New Jersey, so our backyard connects to forest on two sides. We also have a pretty big property, which allowed us to space out a bunch of tables on the grass with food and refreshments. The little party went into the night. Most of our guests left, but closer family and some of our friends stayed late. It was probably 8 o'clock. The mosquitoes were out in full force, so I decided to run over to the shed at the far end of the backyard by the woods to fetch the tiki torches. I grabbed like 6 torches and set them on the grass while I went back in to look for fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard steps in the woods. I stopped what I was doing to take a look out there, but honestly, it was just too dark to see out into the woods. After finding the fuel, I went back to the part of the yard everyone else was at and pitched the torches into the ground. The 6 torches gave off a decent amount of light while keeping us safe from the blood-sucking pests. There were about 6 kids left, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide-and-seek in the woods. My wife and I allowed it, just making sure to tell them to stay close to the tree line. My son and his friends went to play their little game in the woods, which left the rest of us to sit in peace for a little bit.
It was a solid 15 minutes of talking with relatives and hearing the kids laughing and yelling in the near distance out in the woods. But all of a sudden, the yelling turned to screams. Concerning sounding screams from the kids. All of us looked at each other, sitting up in concern. The kids one by one came running out of the woods, yelling that there's something in there. We don't have bears or any big predatory animals around here, so that was not the first thing we assumed it to be. I told all the kids to stay near the patio area. My brother Dom and I, being the biggest men there, decided to go investigate. We took a couple flashlights and off we went into the pitch black woods. The only sounds we heard around us were crickets and other night bugs. So we went deeper, and that's when we started to hear something else. It sounded like an animal at first, but as we followed the sound to get closer, the sound started to become more human-like. We continued to walk, and we agreed we both had the feeling that we were being watched, like stalked. I put my arm out to stop Dom. Standing in the silence now, the best way I could describe the sound we were hearing was a moaning, angry kind of sound. It sounded human, but it was a bizarre sound. Then, a few cracks of the leaves on the ground ahead of us. We aimed our lights over there, and there was someone or something behind the tree. The moaning sound stopped. Dom stepped forward and called out. What happened next was textbook horror movie stuff. A scream, so loud, so blood-curdling, so inhuman, filled the air. I'm sure it could be heard for miles. Dom and I turned and booked it back to the property. We waved at everyone to go inside when we made it back. Dom got on the phone with the sheriff's department. They said it was probably a wild animal. We wanted to insist it was a human, but we honestly couldn't. We to this day don't know who or what we saw and heard in those woods, but it was definitely stalking us and the kids when they were playing hide and seek. And that scream we heard, it just didn't sound human to us. A Redditor by the name of Jessica shared footage she recorded in the Airbnb she was renting. There wasn't supposed to be anybody else in the rental, and she didn't even meet the owners as the keys were left in the mailbox. Shortly into her stay, she was getting ready to take a shower when she started hearing sounds from inside the walls. She rushed to get her camera and get the sounds on video. This is what she captured. As you can see, after finding a sealed ventilation duct and pulling the seal off of it, the terrifying voices of people speaking Latin became much clearer and sound as though they were speaking the Trinitarian formula and other religious phrases. Strangely, the voices apparently fell silent abruptly, but that wasn't where the nightmarish experience ended for Jessica. That night, with the bathroom door open and the bathroom light on, a picture was taken of her as she was sleeping, and the person who took the picture was holding a note in front of the camera that said it's rude to eavesdrop. This was the security footage recorded one rainy night in Huacho, Brazil. In the recording, a confused-looking woman is seen walking through the street in the rain, and at first this seems relatively normal, nothing too unusual, until the woman seems to slowly disappear as she gets closer to the bottom of the screen, until she vanishes altogether. When zoomed in, you can also see the woman seems scantily dressed for the weather conditions seen in the video. Sure, someone can say it's just a smudge on the screen or perhaps some other digital problem. However, moments later, a motorcycle passes by in the same region in which the woman seemed to vanish, yet it's completely visible. And then the same could be said with the truck as it makes its turn, completely visible. It also appears that the driver of the truck may have been reacting to what he also just witnessed to be a vanishing woman. Whether this was just camera trickery or really a wandering apparition is up to the viewer to decide. This video was captured in Costa Rica on someone's home security camera. At an off hour in the night, out from the woods comes a bizarre, horrifying looking creature. First, one might assume it's just a person doing some kind of crab walk, or if this were Australia, they would just assume it's another spider. But you don't even have to watch too closely to ask why or how the arms and legs would be the same length if this were a person. If it was just a person contorting his or her body, the creature wouldn't appear as long as it does and would most likely have a noticeable lump in its back from them contorting their torso. Also, based on the dog's reactions, this was not the work of CGI, as they were reacting to something that's actually there and cause for alarm. This fourth video was taken from the Japanese YouTube channel Omogatoki Films. Their channel focuses on exploring haunted locations and capturing paranormal events on video. In January of this year, the owners of the channel were contacted by a real estate agent regarding a house he's been having trouble selling, due to the fact that the house used to be owned by a family that mysteriously disappeared in 2013.
僕が前勤めていた不動産屋さんの元先輩、何やら僕らに対してちょっと一度見てほしい物件。
その古い戸建てを会社で買ったんだけど、急に飛び込みできた人で、いくらで売りたいか聞くじゃん。でそしたらもう本当破格の
売り主さんが持っていたその土地の上に3人の家族が家を建てて住み始めたらしいんですよね。ただ今から6、7年ぐらい前にある日を境にその3人
All of the previous owner's belongings were left in the house, adding to the mystery. The real estate agent refuses to even enter the house as he believes there's a dark entity in the house, and he hopes that they would be able to search the house and find any kind of explanation, as this is what they do for a living. The agent mentions to them to make sure to keep all the doors shut while investigating the house, but doesn't mention why. As the two are exploring this closet, they notice something after reviewing the footage. See if you can find it.
ほら、もう全部開いてるもん。
ああ、確かに確かに。すっごい、ほんと、物がやばい。
If you didn't see it, behind a clothes rack, you can see two bare feet underneath. This isn't the last time they can be seen. As they search a nearby room, the feet can be seen again, this time much closer and visibly barefoot. Later on in the night, one of the two decide to place a camera in the dark and sit in one room, waiting for something to happen. After about 15 minutes, he decided to investigate other rooms, while still remembering to shut all the doors behind him. As you just saw, there was a face looking in through the door, but as he approaches, it disappears. There's no one outside the door. It could be speculated that the house is haunted by the family that mysteriously disappeared almost a decade ago. This was some alleged sighting of La Llorona. La Llorona is known as a ghost who roams waterfront areas mourning her drowned children. This video was captured in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. The video is of a man running from what resembles La Llorona.
No mames, perra madre. Ah, su puta madre. No mames.
In the video, if you slow it down and zoom in, the figure in the distance resembles a woman in a white dress crying and yelling. The man was coming home from a party around 3 o'clock in the morning when he encountered the woman in front of him. As he starts to run in fear, the woman starts shouting at him, not making any sense of what she's saying. The man allegedly died 3 days after the sighting, and the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. This video was recorded in November of 2020, and it's just recently getting noticed. This was the footage captured by Russian YouTuber Dark Ghost. He posts high-quality ghost hunting videos, and this one might be one of his scariest. A woman had written to him about her deceased son who was obsessed with the paranormal and finding out what happens to the human soul after death and the afterlife. One day he told his mother that he discovered a way to contact deceased relatives, and he traveled to the abandoned village where his late grandmother lived. A week later, the mother received a call from the son, saying he was hearing the voices of his grandparents among other entities. This call was the last that was heard of the son, and his body was found on the streets of the village. The cause of death was ruled to be acute heart failure. The mother asked Dark Ghost to visit the grandparents' old house where the son would often visit, and this was some of the footage he captured. Various sounds such as footsteps and knocks can be heard throughout the video, and on multiple occasions, doors and cabinets can be seen swinging open or closed on their own. If you didn't see it, a black shadow can be seen floating across the screen clear as day.
Либо шкаф, все грохочет, я не понимаю, либо комод. Опа.
Next, he enters a creepy red room populated with disturbing pictures that the woman's son would collect and bring to the house.
Бля. Вроде бы как. У меня вообще всего тут такого, как бы, фотографий таких. Пипец. Это просто жесть.
This is definitely one of those houses that an explorer should not go to alone. Based on the events in this video, there may have been someone or something in the house with him, watching him the entire time. Could it be the spirit of the woman's son? Or perhaps a much more hostile entity? Or could it all just be trickery? As usual, that's up for you to decide.
An 18-year-old boy named Liam was home alone for a whole week when his dad and stepmom went on their honeymoon. While playing video games in his brother's old bedroom, who had since moved out, he could hear a kind of scraping noise that seemed to be coming from outside. The strange thing, this room was on the second floor, so it seemed nothing but odd to hear something outside scraping against the walls. He tried to ignore it by turning the video game up louder, but the scraping sounds only became more apparent. He decided to finally look out the window, but it was too dark to really see anything. He left the window open a crack to better hear the noise if it persisted. Liam spun around to discover the window was now open and someone was crawling into the room through it. He was able to push the intruder back out the window before he could fully make it into the room, who then fell 2 stories down into the bushes below. He apparently wasn't too injured, as he was gone within minutes. During a rainy night in central Islip on Long Island, a teenager named Ian was home alone, so he invited his friend Carl over. His friend texted that he would be over in 2 minutes. Ian prepared the video games he planned on playing with Carl and heard the gate to the backyard close. Confused as to why Carl went out back, Ian went out to the backyard. His shed door was open with the light on. As he called out Carl's name walking to the shed, the light inside the shed turned off. Simultaneously, Ian received a text from Carl saying, "I'm here." Ian responded, "Are you in the shed?" He responded back, "I'm at the front door." As Ian looked up, the door to the shed pulled shut with force. Ian ran back into his house and let Carl in. When the police responded to Ian's call, they checked the shed, found the door was back open, and that nobody was inside. "45-year-old Chris was supposed to be working late for the night, so his family went out to eat dinner without him. However, he was unexpectedly able to come home early. As a result, he had the house to himself for a few hours. He went down to his man cave in the basement to watch TV. That was when he heard the backyard basement window flap open, and someone stuck their head inside, peering around the room. He hid behind the couch until the person shut the window. Chris ran upstairs with a baseball bat and shut off all the lights. He waited in the kitchen, which was by the back door. Somebody suddenly reached their arm through the pet door in an attempt to unlock the door. Chris swung the baseball bat as hard as he could at the person's arm, causing them to scream and flee. That same night, sirens roared down the street and stopped at a neighborhood house. It turned out one of Chris's neighbors 3 doors down had been murdered, and when his wife came home, she found the house was ransacked with missing valuables everywhere. And then she found her husband, dead on the kitchen floor with a stab wound in the back of his head. A young girl named Anne was home alone one snowy Friday night. Her parents were out to dinner, and her sister was out with friends. She was taking a nap on her bed. She awoke to the thump. She was sure it came from her closet door, so she got up and bravely opened it. There didn't seem to be anyone inside, so she closed the closet and spun around. There she saw the head under the bed, the head of a man looking at her with an expressionless stare. She fell to the floor screaming. That's when the closet doors behind her opened and someone grabbed her and pulled her in. The man from under the bed emerged and approached her as she was being held down. The two of them carried her downstairs where they put tape over her mouth and tied her arms together. One checked to make sure the coast was clear before carrying her outside, where they planned to put her in their car's trunk. However, about halfway to their car, a large group of teenagers came riding down on their bikes and witnessed it all. Some of them were screaming for help, while some of them got off their bikes and started to slowly approach the two men. They knew they wouldn't get away with it now, so they dropped in, jumped into their car, and sped away. She was completely awake and conscious throughout all of this. It's unknown why they didn't just tie her up while she was sleeping. The most realistic possibility is that they simply wanted to scare the girl. This may seem like a crazy, rare occurrence, and you may even call it fake. However, things like this happen all the time and are shown commonly on the news. Perhaps they're just the stories we forget about. "22-year-old Garber still lived with his parents. He was the youngest of 3, so his 2 siblings had already moved out and his parents were out 3 to 4 nights a week. This one particular stormy night, he was home alone in his room when he could swear he heard something hit his window. It wasn't insanely weird, as the weather was pretty bad and something may have just blown into his window. However, a second thud at the window sent his heart racing. He lifted his blind and could see somebody standing out there. Even through the damp windows and the pouring rain, he knew he did not recognize that person. He shut the blinds to send the message to go away. However, he wasn't even able to move away from the windowsill before something else was thrown at the window. Garber opened the blind, and this time even the window, and shouted, "What do you want?" The man down below called back, "Come outside, I want to show you something." Garber went downstairs to call the police. They asked him if he was sure that he didn't know the person and if they had caused any damage. The 911 operator asked Garber to call back if the person continued to harass him or showed signs of wanting to break in. Garber hung up the phone. He wanted to see a better view from down in the kitchen, so he opened the kitchen blinds. Garber called the police right back and informed them that the man was standing at his kitchen window and to send somebody right away. The next time he looked back at the kitchen window, the man was gone. That was the last time Garber ever saw that man. I hope you found this video interesting, scary, or just entertaining. If you'd like to hear more Home Alone stuff, I do have a video about 10 true Home Alone stories. Number 5. It's been estimated that nationwide there are 600,000 ski-related injuries per year and an average of 54 deaths per year. The most common causes of death or injury while skiing are hitting a tree or falling off a cliff. 54% of these deaths occurred on beginner-friendly trails, while 31% were on expert trails. Surprisingly, the increase in the number of people who wear helmets hasn't resulted in fewer fatalities. Helmets are designed to protect riders at about 12 miles per hour, while a skier or a snowboarder who collides with a tree or another rider is typically going 25 to 40 miles per hour. The 3 videos you're about to see are of horrifying skiing accidents that can happen to anybody. Fortunately, all of the skiers in these videos survived.
Oh shit! Oh,
By some miracle, all of these men went home with only broken bones. Number 4. Sarah Jones was a camera woman who died at the age of 27 while on the set of Midnight Rider. She was struck by a passing train as the film crew desperately tried to remove the props from the tracks. There are 2 different videos capturing the moment, one from on board the train and one from the crew, capturing in higher quality the frantic moments just before impact as they try to pull the hospital bed off the tracks. This footage is definitely chilling, especially knowing how Sarah lost her life just seconds after the clip ends abruptly. As you can see in the video, the crew wasn't able to remove the hospital bed in time. When the train collided with the bed, it recoiled and struck Sarah, propelling her into the train, where she was struck and killed instantly. The filmmakers were attempting to shoot a dream sequence involving an actor playing Greg Allman, who was laying in the hospital bed placed on the train tracks. There were attempts to drop the scene from the movie, but director Randall Miller eventually proceeded with the now deadly filming. He was later tried and pleaded guilty to manslaughter, serving 2 years in prison. Number 3. There's an activity called zorbing, which involves a giant inflatable ball in which people strap themselves, then bounce down a ski slope or a hill, and presumably have a good time doing so. But imagine being stuck in said ball, tumbling down a hill, veering off the designated path, and rolling down the side of a mountain with absolutely no control. That's exactly what happened to 2 men in Russia in 2013 at the Dombai ski resort. The video you're about to see was filmed on a cell phone by a friend of the 2 men. It's truly horrifying to see the helplessness of the situation.
Держи его, блядь! Ох, блядь! О, нет! Как так-то? Да не укатится, нормально. Ох, блядь. Да, остановится и все. Об камень, давай об камень! Пиздец. Kim vardı içinde? Блять, а там чё внизу? Ебать. А кто это, чем вообще? Я не знаю, под...
At one point, you can see somebody manage to get in front of the ball and momentarily stop it, but unfortunately, that didn't last long. The ball tumbled down the mountain for almost a mile, slamming into rocks as it picked up speed. When the 2 men were found inside the ball, they were rushed to the hospital. One of the men, Denis Burakov, aged 27, injured his spinal cord and died on the way to the hospital. The other man, Vladimir Sherbakov, aged 33, suffered a concussion and deep cuts to his arms and face. Number 2. 2 men were out for a workout running in the Machitawan trails in Alberta, Canada.
Pausing workout.
When they had to pause the workout after being interrupted by an unwanted guest. A black bear emerges from the woods and begins closely stalking the 2 men, likely waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The 2 men wisely huddle closely together to appear bigger, as you can hear them say many times throughout the video, which proves to be successful in keeping the bear at bay.
That's it. That's as far as you're going. Stop. Stop. Right now. Stop. We can't. Get together. Get us together. We'll look bigger together. We can't, man. We can't. Just stay together. Stay together. We can't. Stay together.
There's an alarming amount of people who believe this bear was just being playful, when in reality over 90% of black bear encounters are predatory. This was more than likely not an experienced bear, and it was testing them to figure out if they would be worth the energy and effort to attack. If anybody should ever encounter a bear, never take it lightly or assume the bear just wants to be friendly, as that's almost never the case. Different kinds of bears call for different kinds of actions to be taken, for example, standing still like a plank or playing dead. Fortunately, the bear in this video eventually seemed to lose interest in the men, giving them enough time to make their escape.
Resuming workout.
Though it wasn't a good idea for them to start running away in such a close proximity to the bear. Had there not been two people in that encounter, that bear would have most likely attacked. Number 1. This is perhaps one of the most horrifying natural disaster videos you could find. Not only does it capture the horrifyingly destructive EF4 tornado, but it shows the horror that ensues for many people as their houses, cars, and whole towns are completely destroyed when they're trapped in the middle of tornadoes or other disasters. We can see at the start of the video it seems to be a very nice, wealthier area with nice looking houses in the background and a lot of green and open land. And in that same shot we see the tornado that's about to destroy it all. The man holding the camera then goes to comfort either his wife or daughter, and we see nothing but blackness. But listen as the tornado passes directly over the house, destroying everything outside.
Holy shit. Holy moly. Alright. Holy shit. Alright, I gotta go. I'm coming, honey. Shit, where you at, hon? God damn, it's bad. Alright, stay down, honey. Oh, shit, Josie. Uh-oh. We're gonna get into some shit here, honey.
Is this gonna save us?
I hope so, buddy. Oh my God! Okay, honey. Holy shit! Stay in. Oh, man. Oh. Shit.
Don't go out there.
No, not yet.
Don't.
Oh.
Stay here.
Oh my God, Josie.
You can feel the man's dread as he then has to go outside to see the damage.
Holy moly. Oh my God. Our house is freaking destroyed, Josie. Oh my God. I'm in shock. I can't believe this happened. Oh my God, Josie. The neighbors' houses are gone. Josie!
He then gets another shot outside from where he was at the beginning of the video and sees nothing but rubble for miles. This turned into this in only a matter of a minute. All those nice trees and houses you saw in the background are completely gone. It just goes to show you the true power of Mother Nature in a horrifying way, and that nature can always win.
This happened when I was really young. I'm talking 2nd or 3rd grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser or a dinner party or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night, but while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on, make sure all the blinds were closed, typical stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, so 3 hours minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant enough for me to instantly make the connection, even at that young age. I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone. So I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors, closed all the blinds, checked the windows, even the light. Everything was shut tight, which confused me a little because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat. So I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so there was a burst of lightning followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was going to fall on the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there, trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds. Every so often, there were these weird creaking sounds, like shifting wood. Thing is, the entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer, so I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before, I was 100% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. I immediately went downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point, I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then, from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but two bare feet walked into view. Two nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor, and I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me. With wide eyes, I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a standoff, where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually, they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, the front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after that. Part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it the next morning. After making sure the front door was locked, I slunked back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it so far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark that didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I'd try to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been. But there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, but one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window, and just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. It was exactly what you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students, so to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you could see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm going to remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, though. The school year was over, so I couldn't see him even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime just before 2 when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up, or knew we were down there, or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely that they had known we were down there, but now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone who was pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid Samuel Robinson III who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking this situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a tiny bit. My friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from our yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so that I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would have been friends with this kid given any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know, so I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate the situation, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what David had just said. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it, I'm telling you. We must have caused quite the commotion because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and they'd deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for whatever reason, and then he stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just uncomfortable, but living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years have passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The 4 of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the 4 of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The four of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The four of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out hi in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then, one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound and, from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this, by the way. We're still close in contact, so I obviously asked them. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, They all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the four of them split off while Lindsay told the third guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do two things: keep the event as far away from the public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed, or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little, but luckily that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car. This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men and we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. the two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by, and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but it didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first. But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff. Stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too, your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which he actually found pretty funny. Then that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something.
With police being in the front lines of investigating everything out of the ordinary, it's no surprise they'll come across some disturbing things. Some of the findings on this list are weird, some shocking, and some just disturbing. So, here are 6 disturbing police discoveries. Number 6. In Glen Rose, Texas, neighbors of Tasha Chantel Hatcher noticed her acting odd and immediately notified police. And it's a good thing they did, as the police found something completely unexpected and horrifying inside of her oven. Now, Tasha and her neighbors lived in a relatively peaceful area. However, one day when some of Tasha's neighbors noticed her acting a bit nervous and blasting music, they knew something was wrong and thought it would be best to get the police to investigate her house. Tasha is a single mother of a 2-year-old girl named Nevaeh. Tasha always seemed like a playful and caring mother, which made this whole situation just more shocking. When the cops arrived, they found Tasha's daughter inside of the oven, which had been turned on. Tasha admitted to willfully doing this, and as a result of her actions, her daughter suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns and was hospitalized. She has since been put under foster care. Tasha has been charged with serious bodily harm to a child. She is currently being held on a $300,000 bond. Number 5. In 1969, 3 people riding in a 1950 Chevy were reported missing and were never found. Only a year later, 3 teenagers riding in a 1969 Camaro were also reported missing. For more than 45 years, their location had remained a mystery until just recently when all 6 of them were found inside both cars at the bottom of Foss Lake in Oklahoma. Jimmy Williams, Lee Johnson, and Michael Rios went missing while on their way to a football game. This was on November 20th, 1970. The Camaro, belonging to Jimmy Williams, was found at the bottom of Foss Lake by police divers who were actually in the middle of a training exercise. But that wasn't all they found. They also discovered a second car in the lake, which also had 3 bodies inside. The bodies were identified as 69-year-old John Alva Porter, who was the driver, and his friends Nora Duncan and Cleburne Hammock. They had been missing for more than 50 years. The circumstances of these deaths are still not fully known, but the police believe foul play to be the most logical explanation. It's believed that it's just too much of a coincidence that 2 nights out so long ago that happened just within a year ended in such an eerily similar fashion. It will likely never be known just what happened all those years ago. Number 4. In December of 2015, Russian officers found 37 unmarked sacks stuffed with sawdust sitting on railway cars. At first glance, the mysterious bags just seemed to contain wood shavings. However, the officers discovered that hidden inside of the bags were hundreds of severed bear parts which smugglers intended to sell on the black market. Police confiscated 527 bear feet, a bear muzzle, bear gallbladders, and 3 musk deer glands. The body parts were destined for Asia, where they would be used for medicine. In fact, Asia is responsible for the poaching of a lot of animals. They hold beliefs that many animal parts, for example ivory and tusks, can cure diseases such as cancer. A disappointing statistic has shown that bears in the past few years have been becoming a much bigger target to poaching. Number 3. During Halloween night of 2015 in Slingerlands, New York, police discovered that 2 Halloween decorations were not what they seemed. Police were cruising Veeder Road in a rather wealthy area when they coincidentally received a call from a resident on the same road telling them that they saw 2 dead body decorations hanging on their front tree. The creepy part was that they didn't hang anything on their front tree. Police arrived within minutes and saw exactly what the woman was talking about, but upon closer inspection, realized these were not decorations at all, but rather 2 real decomposed bodies. The woman recalled 2 men who were suspiciously walking around out front in her house about an hour earlier, though she couldn't give any worthwhile details about the 2 men. It's unknown if these 2 men the woman mentioned were responsible for this, who these dead bodies belonged to, if and why these 2 men killed them, and why they targeted her house. Number 2. In 2014, there was a Reddit post asking people about their scariest experiences as a police officer. A Redditor whose account has since been deleted replied to the post, explaining a situation he and his partner for the night had encountered. There was a call to inspect an air vent at an elderly woman's house, as she suspected there had been an animal or something up there, as a large part of the vent in the living room was caving down as if something were in there. She had just gotten back from a vacation that day with her daughter to find this. It was a slow night and they were the closest to the house, so they were instructed to check it out. Stepping into the house, they could immediately smell a foul odor filling the air in the house, an odor the old woman said she couldn't smell. The old woman showed the officers the specific air vent where she saw the bulge. The vent cover was very large and old-fashioned. It had 4 big screws that kept the cover on. The smell was most unbearable by this vent. The cops knew something was dead inside of there. They undid the screws and shined a light into the vents. They were disturbed not to see a dead raccoon or something they were expecting, but rather a dead person. They had a hard time dragging the body out as it was stuck in the narrow duct, but they were soon able to get him out and identify him. He was a bald black man, mid-40s, wearing an unzipped black hoodie with a stained undershirt underneath, denim jeans, and brown work boots. He had a knife tightly gripped in his stiff fingers, which the cops assumed was meant to harm the old woman. This duct led to an air vent outside, which is how the man was able to break in the first place. The author of the post said that since the man was apparently stuck in the vent for days in the summer heat, he could have died of a certain number of things, most likely of thirst. Number 1. On September 12, 2015, a disturbed 38-year-old Swedish doctor whose name has not been revealed drugged a woman he knew with strawberries he had laced with Rohypnol, raped her, and then drove her across state to imprison her inside an underground bunker he had built on his property.
The woman continued to endure rape and physical harm for a few days until September 18th, when the doctor drove her back to her home 350 miles away to collect her belongings. However, the doctor grew nervous when he arrived to the house to discover police had ransacked the place. This made him decide to take her directly to them to have her inform the authorities that she was okay. Of course, the police knew better and pulled her aside to get the real story out of her. The cops immediately arrested the doctor and searched his home, and what they discovered there proved just how insane this man was. His house contained rubber masks of bearded men and old women, syringes, birth control pills, condoms, the wheelchair he used to carry the woman from her home into his car, and perhaps most disturbingly, wrist and ankle chains attached to the wall. Police speculated by the design of the bunker, with a bathroom and covered courtyard, that the doctor had planned on keeping the woman locked up there for several years. Police also believed that he was planning on doing this for years. He clearly built this bunker for the sole purpose of keeping one or more victims captive. Friends of the doctor were shocked and couldn't believe he would do something like this. He was described as helpful and polite. The exact sentencing for this doctor is unknown, but it's certain he'll be going away for a long time. As a little bonus clip, here's an interesting story. A snorkeler called the emergency services after spotting what he thought were human remains at the bottom of a lake. Police sent someone from their diving team to investigate. He took a camera down there to record the remains and found two bodies sitting upright in plastic garden chairs and appeared to be having a tea party. One of them held this sign that read, "Bernie living the dream in the river." While the figures looked very real from a distance, upon closer inspection the diver realized that they were plastic fakes planted by scuba divers as a gag. If these were real, this would have made for a pretty horrifying find. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook, and I will see you in the next one.
These are 6 of some of the creepiest and most disturbing science experiments throughout human history. Number 6. The concept has become almost a staple in science fiction: mind control. However, what if it's not as fictional as you may have thought? Scientists at the University of California were able to develop cyborg beetles by implanting electronic components into the beetles' cocoons. The insects could then actually be controlled via a remote control and instructed how and where to fly, almost like an RC helicopter. The experiment was then pushed a stage further when the military started to experiment on rats and implemented heat sensors and small cameras onto the tiny creatures. The military's main goal with this is to create a means of conducting safer search and rescue missions or for surveillance using the rats and beetles. Essentially, the scientists turned neurons in the rats' brains on and off using different colors of light. The really creepy part is that scientists believe this opens up the possibility for potential human mind control in the near future. Number 5. For decades, the Soviet Union actually created and maintained a secret lab known as the Chamber, Laboratory 1, and Laboratory 12, which led a sinister program to devise new methods of poisoning people. Beginning in 1921 and continuing for most of the 21st century, the chamber was used as a covert research facility for secret police agencies. Prisoners from Russian labor camps, or gulags, were exposed to a number of deadly poisons in the chamber, including mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, and more. The purpose of which was to find a tasteless, odorless chemical that could not be detected in a dead body. Men and women of varying ages and physical conditions were brought to the laboratories, where they were given the poisons which would be mixed into a meal or drink, or served as a medication. Eventually, a preparation with the scientist's desired properties was developed, and it was called C2. C2 was not detectable post-mortem, and according to witness testimonies, a victim who was given C2 changed physically, becoming shorter and weaker, and after falling silent and calm, died within only 15 minutes. People of varied physical conditions and ages were brought to the labs in order to have a more complete picture for the action of each poison. In addition to human experimentation, the scientists would also execute every prisoner brought down to the lab who survived the poisonous effects. Number 4. The Stanford Prison Experiments. Conducted at Stanford University on the morning of August 17, 1971,
a group of young men in the Palo Alto area received visits from local police officers and were arrested for armed robbery and burglary. Their neighbors watched on as the young men were searched, handcuffed, and forced into the back of the police cars, not realizing that it was all part of a prearranged setup. The students were taken to a Palo Alto police station where they were booked, fingerprinted, moved to a holding cell, and blindfolded. Finally, they were transported to the Stanford University Psychology Department, or as it was referred to for the experiments, the Stanford County Prison. The point of the experiment was to essentially demonstrate how authority and power dynamics affect a human being's capacity for evil. 24 male students of Stanford University were chosen and randomly assigned roles of either prisoners or guards, and the so-called Stanford County Prison was just a mock-designed prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology building. Those who were assigned as guards began to humiliate and psychologically abuse the assigned prisoners with little to no instruction to even do so. Some of the guards would do pointlessly cruel things to the prisoners, for instance waking them up at off hours of the night and forcing them to do jumping jacks, or threatening them with batons, and much worse. The prisoners in turn became submissive and depersonalized, taking the abuse and saying very little in protest. When prisoners would request to leave the experiments, they would be told this is a real prison environment and they could not leave. A few prisoners started to experience slight mental breakdowns within a few days and were only then allowed to leave the experiments.
God damn it! Fucked up! You don't know, I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just fucking can't take it. I feel so fucked up inside. I feel really fucked up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I can't say that. I'm fucked up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all fucked up inside.
The behavior of everyone involved became so extreme that the experiment, which was meant to last 2 weeks, was terminated after 6 days. Number 3. For you animal lovers out there, this one may be a little disturbing. In 1940, Russian scientists released a video of their experiments which involved severed dog heads being kept alive for several hours. The severed heads would wiggle their ears in response to sounds and even lick their mouths. The scientists who were behind the experiment claimed they were able to keep the animals alive by attaching an artificial blood circulation system to the head. But that was just the first time that scientists had created these so-called zombie dogs. In 2005, American scientists tried again by flushing all the blood from the dogs' bodies and replacing it with oxygen and sugar-filled saline. 3 hours later, after the team gave the dogs a blood transfusion and an electric shock, the dogs were back from the dead with fully animated severed heads, with one even allegedly regaining consciousness. There's only footage of the 1940 experiment that's available on the internet. If it makes you feel any better, the experiments kind of had good intentions, as this kind of treatment could apparently one day save people from hemorrhaging blood too quickly. Number 2. During the time of the Holocaust, the Nazis decided to perform several experiments on humans, causing the victims to suffer to unbearable degrees, and for the most part, resulted in death. These torturous experiments were done on concentration camp prisoners during World War II, most of whom were Jews. One of the most feared doctors during this time was Josef Mengele, who was also known as the Angel of Death. He lived in the Auschwitz concentration camp, and what he enjoyed most was experimenting with the genetics of twins and people with deformities. He experimented on over 1,000 pairs of twins, with only about 200 surviving the experiments. However, survivors of the experiments didn't live long regardless, as most were killed anyway. The Nazis wanted to know if a person's joints and limbs could be removed and transplanted into someone else. These cruel experiments led to scores of concentration camp prisoners having limbs needlessly amputated. The aim was to study the regeneration of bones, muscles, and nerves. Every attempt to transplant a limb or joint was a failure. Many were killed, mutilated, and exposed to excruciating pain. Sections of muscle, bone, and nerves were also removed in fruitless attempts to regenerate those body parts. Other horrific Nazi experiments also consisted of forcing victims to drink seawater in hopes that they would find a way to make seawater drinkable, but failed every single time. Scientists forced victims to drink only seawater and deprived them of all food and fresh water. The experiment became so unbearable that some victims actually licked a freshly mopped floor just to get a small amount of fresh water. Number 1. There have been many reports of North Korean human experimentation of prisoners in gas chambers, testing deadly chemical weapons, and surgery without anesthesia. These reports show human rights abuses similar to those of Nazi and Japanese human experimentation in World War II. The North Korean government of course denies these allegations and claims that all prisoners in North Korea are humanely treated. One former North Korean female prisoner shared what she witnessed, claiming 50 healthy women prisoners were selected and given poisoned cabbage leaves, which all the women were forced to eat despite cries of distress from those who had already eaten them. According to the woman, all 50 were dead after 20 minutes of vomiting blood. Now all 50 women ate the leaf, as refusing to do so would have meant that they and their families would be severely punished. Kwon Hyuk, who was a former prison head of security at Camp 22, described laboratories equipped respectively for poison gas, suffocation gas, and blood experiments in which 3 or 4 people, sometimes families, are the experimental subjects. After undergoing medical checks, the chambers are sealed and the poison is injected through a tube, while scientists observe from the outside. Kwon even stated, "I saw an entire family being killed. They were put in the gas chamber where they all suffocated. The last to die was the youngest son." Kwon stated the parents tried to save the children using mouth-to-mouth resuscitation for as long as they had the strength, and that it was the most horrific and evil thing he had ever seen. Everything we don't want usually gets thrown into the garbage for the local sanitation workers, or as we like to call them, garbage men, to pick up. Usually, whatever you have stuffed in trash cans or bags gets dumped into a truck without a second glance, which is why some people feel the garbage truck could be the best place to get rid of some of the skeletons in their closets. Maybe even literally. Garbage men all around the world, as expected, find horrific, disturbing things being dumped into their trucks every day. These are 5 short examples of this with downright creepy backstories. This experience was shared to me by a New York State sanitation worker named Ricky. Ricky had a set group of coworkers on his truck, the driver, Norm, and the other trash collector who would ride on the back of the truck along with Ricky, named Al. Al was always a rough and tough kind of guy. He had the long grayish beard, bald head, stocky build, tattoo-covered arms, and the deep trucker's voice. He was the kind of guy who you wouldn't want to get on their bad side. Long story short, Ricky and Norm were as close with Al as his aggressive and demeaning personality could allow. There really wasn't much fun between the three, and it was mostly a show-up, do-the-work kind of relationship. One particular day, Ricky noticed Al was acting really strange, quieter, noticeably unhappy. When he attempted to approach Al and get him to open up to be friendly, Al responded with a lot of hostility, saying things like, "Mind your own business, I'm not unhappy, focus on the job." Clearly something was going on in his personal life, and he wasn't the type to be open about things, so Ricky just left it alone. Now on the route they were assigned to, the truck passed both Norm and Al's house at some point. On this particular day, when they stopped at Al's house, he told Rick firmly to run down to the next house over and grab the plastic table that was sitting by the curb. Ricky said, "No, I'll just wait until we get over there." In response, Al yelled at him to just do it. Confused and a bit afraid, Ricky conformed and started walking over to the next house. As Ricky picked up the table and started heading back to the truck, after responding to Norm's confused hand motions behind the wheel, Ricky noticed Al hurriedly throwing a bag into the back of the truck. When Ricky threw the table into the truck, he saw the long black bag sitting over the rest of the waste, and imagined the worst.
but knowing Al's aggressive and defensive nature, he kept quiet. By the end of the shift, when Al had left, Ricky stopped Norm and told him what happened. The two reported what happened to one of their superiors, and the waste that was dumped from the truck was thoroughly searched. Eventually, they found the black bag that Al had dumped into the truck, and the now squishy red contents that had been oozing from the bag. Robert Calvin was temporarily a garbage man for a city department in Los Angeles one summer because a guy quit. Originally, his job was only to consist of mowing grass and whatnot around town. However, he and his temporary team received a call from the mayor one day requesting that they go pick up the remaining stuff in an evicted tenant's apartment. The collectors arrived and found that there were clothes everywhere, a bed, some other furniture, and a couch. The place was absolutely disgusting. Along with the clothes, garbage was scattered everywhere, the rugs were stained, there were even holes in the wooden living room floor. When going to help a few guys lift the bed and couch, Robert had noticed empty vials laying around the floor. He told his co-workers to be cautious as he knew there was a possibility of needles having been stuffed in the furniture. After taking a closer look, Robert and his co-workers realized that this guy had shoved dirty needles down his couch and bed in hopes of someone picking it up and getting stabbed. Tucked further beneath the couch cushion was a small crumpled up note, saying, "You're not getting off this easy." What was found in the trash can in the backyard was even more disturbing. Filled to the brim was a trash can full of worn-out children's dolls, and in most of the dolls' tiny plastic arms were tiny holes assumed to have come from the needles. It was safe for the workers to assume that the man who had been evicted from the house had his fair share of illegal drugs. A sanitation worker named Sarah shared one of her experiences as a garbage collector with the internet. Sarah explained that while it's not seen on cop shows, police enlist the help of garbage collectors to look for crime scene evidence and collected waste. Near Sarah's trash route is a known meth haven, and from time to time the cops would ask Sarah and her co-workers if they had found certain types of items in the trash, like certain kinds of containers or chemicals. Interestingly, she and her co-workers would also be asked to look for burglary-type objects such as weapons if there were to be a local robbery. On a more notable occasion, Sarah was asked to keep an eye out for cash registers in the trash because robbers could tend to steal entire registers, bring them home, and then toss them in the garbage when they empty them, assuming like everyone else that whatever ends up in the garbage is out of sight and out of mind of anyone. One more disturbing experience, however, was when Sarah and co-workers found a leg stuffed in a garbage bag in somebody's trash can. On that same day after the shift when police were notified, it was discovered that Sarah and her co-workers had picked up more than one body parts. In fact, the body parts had been dumped strategically around town in random houses' trash cans, and they needed to search all of the trash to find the whole body. A Reddit user named Georgie P, who happens to be a garbage man, who has a number of posts relating to sanitation work, shared his story in a Reddit post asking garbage men what was the most disturbing things they found in people's garbage. Georgie works in North Carolina, and he explained that despite what people may think, garbage men are nosy and do like to peek a bit through people's garbage bins before dumping them into the trucks. Well, one particular day when he did that at a corner house in Winterville, North Carolina, he found a white, half-sealed plastic bag, and through the opening up top was a sketchy-looking picture of a young girl. Georgie took the bag out, opened it, and found that there was at least a pound's worth of images of the same young girl, who appeared to be about 13 years old. He called his co-worker over to check it out with him. Some images were school portraits, but most of the others were a lot creepier. Most of them seemed to have been taken without the girl's knowledge. Some appeared to have been taken through an upstairs window aimed to a house across the street, specifically zoomed into a room with the light on, and with the same young girl getting dressed in her bedroom. It seemed as they went through the pile, the images only got more and more disturbing. Georgie told his coworker to call the police as he continued flipping through the images. The creepiness levels peaked as high as they could go, however, when Georgie held up an image that was taken in a dark room. It became clear what it was very quickly. It was a picture of the little girl sleeping in her bed, taken by somebody standing right above her bed. The owner of the house was home, and he was arrested that same day and possibly charged with stalking of a child pornography since some of the images captured the young girl while she was nude, and breaking and entering. This last mention on this list is told in first-person point of view by a current sanitation worker named Hugo. I work as a garbage man in Manchester. I've been doing this for 11 years, so I've seen all of the weird shit that gets thrown out. Or at least I thought I did, before this. It was a day like any other. The shift was going as quick as could be expected, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The truck emitted its ear-piercing shriek as it came to a stop. The sound I'm beyond used to, which signaled when I needed to hop off the truck and chuck the unwanted waste inside yet another plastic container into the giant pungent truck that has become a part of my life. However, at this one particular house, in this one particular container, was a Lenovo laptop. I picked it up, and it seemed to be in pristine condition. Besides the grease and the little pieces of food that it had collected from sitting in a garbage can, but rubbing it off with my heavy work shirt, it was about as good as new. I naturally took a look at the house to see if the owner saw me take their laptop, and to my surprise, there was somebody standing by the window behind the partially open curtains. He was kind of peeking at me as if he didn't want me to see him. It was actually quite disturbing. Now I felt weird taking the laptop, so while still holding it, I took the garbage can and dumped it into the truck while pretending to do the same with the laptop. Instead, however, I placed the laptop on the back platform of the truck, returned the plastic pail to the curb, knocked on the side of the truck, and we moved along to the next house. That was where I handed my driver the laptop to hold onto. As I picked up the can at the next house, I noticed the guy from the previous house coming out to check his empty pail, and then turning to me and walking over to me. I returned the favor and met him halfway, and he just cut straight to the chase and asked me if I took his laptop. I felt my heart drop a bit for some reason, and stuttered at first, telling him I threw it in the back of the truck. What he asked me next shocked me. He asked if he could check the back of the truck to look for the laptop. Now I felt really awkward, but recovered by telling him firmly I have no time to play games, we're on a tight schedule. I simply walked back to the truck, dumped the contents of the pail into the truck, and we moved on. Luckily that block ended with that house, and we were able to sail away from that creep. The wind in my face had never felt so good. His reaction to my possibly taking his laptop only made me grow even more curious as to what was on it, which is why I lied and told him I threw it out in the first place. When my shift ended, I took the laptop to my car and drove home. On the way, I couldn't stop staring at that laptop. I just had to know what was on it. I pulled to the side of a deserted road and turned on the laptop, which surprisingly had battery left. The computer loaded up fast, like less than 30 seconds, and there was no password to the account, which was just titled Roy. I was wondering why he would throw this away. My question was answered very quickly. Scattered across the messy desktop were folders on top of folders, all titled very ambiguously. For example, one titled Fun Powder, another titled V288, and another titled Fruit Patch Boys. Inside all of the folders I clicked on were hundreds of videos and pictures of underage porn. I could only open about 4 before I started to feel sick to my stomach. I ended up dialing 911 and reporting this guy for child pornography possession. Now, the guy had pictures of himself on the computer, so I was not digging my own grave here by calling 911. However, as I should have guessed, the guy skipped town. I found a lot of messed up shit during my career, but never anything as bad as this. Maybe this guy would have gotten away with it had he just been smart and tucked the laptop underneath another bag.